All right, everybody, welcome to IAEI News Live. My name is Thomas Dimitrovich, and I have on the other line, I have Mr. Pete Jackson and David Humphrey, and we're going to talk about plan review, and we're going to talk about plan review starting now. All right, Mr. Pete Jackson and David Humphrey, welcome to IAEI News Live, guys.
Hello.
You ready?
Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you here. So we're going to be talking plan review, as you two know, because that's why you're here. But what I want to do first is just do some introduction. So, and David, I think why don't you go first? Give us a little bit of who you are, your background, and all that jazz.
Well, I'm David Humphrey. I've been working in the electrical trades full-time since 1978. I worked 10 years in the field as an electrician, journeyman, and master electrician, and became an inspector in 1988, a senior inspector in 95, and the electrical plan review engineer in 2005. I'm an instructor for the IAEI, and I've served as a principal member of Code Making Panel 8 for the 2008 and 2011 code, the chair of Panel 9 for the 14, 17, and 20 code, and am currently serving as the chair of Code Making Panel 2. A little about me.
Awesome. And as a fellow Code Making Panel 2 member, we welcome your leadership, sir. Thank you.
You.
And that's what we call brown nosing. So, Mr. Pete Jackson in the house. Pete, why don't you give us a little bit who you are, your background, where you're out of, all that good stuff.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, I'm Pete Jackson. I'm the Chief Electrical Inspector for the City of Bakersfield, California. That's a jurisdiction of about 400,000 people, 100 miles north of Los Angeles. I've been in the electrical industry for 41 years. I completed the NECA IBW apprenticeship. I've been a journeyman wireman since 1984, electrical contractor since 1996, and the chief electrical inspector here since 2005. I am a current member of Code Making Panel 4 and the Correlating Committee. I represent enforcement for the 2023 NEC.
Awesome. So Bakersfield, California, that's like rough duty out there, man. I mean, you get well, you have to put your suntan lotion on instead of your parkas and snowsuits.
Yeah, especially, yeah. And that's the way I liken it to people. My daughter's in New York, and, you know, they hide out inside in the winter, and here we hide out inside in the summer to beat those 100-degree days. That's
absolutely right. Absolutely right. So what's really cool about this here is we've got David Humphrey, who's in one jurisdiction, and Pete, you're in a separate jurisdiction, obviously. I mean, you guys are in two opposite sides of the country. And I think it's going to bring a good perspective with regard to the topic at hand, which is the plan review, because I think it may vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction on what's performed. But I think, and we got Ryan Jackson out there. Thanks for joining, Ryan. So would you think, Pete, Ryan Jackson, Pete Jackson, wow, I don't know. Is this like,
we're double teaming you, yeah.
You're double teaming us. So let's talk a little bit about what is a plan review. And I mean, is that like would you consider a plan review as a plan review as from a fundamental? I mean, how would you each describe it? David, what are your thoughts on a plan review?
Well, the plans are the foundation of any proper construction project. With electrical, it gives the base information. Is this job allowed at this location? Is the service allowed? Different things of this nature. Without a good plan review, it's almost a shot in the dark. It's where are you going to go? How are you going to progress? Is it correct? And it also can help avoid very expensive fixes later down the road. It's a lot easier to do it on paper. When you see that a service disconnecting means might be being placed in a location not permitted by the code, you can see that on plans. It can be addressed with paper and ink rather than a costly rework of an installation.
Okay, so we're reviewing what, one-line diagrams, Pete? What types of diagrams are you guys looking at?
Well, it depends on the project and it depends on the occupancy. But again, it's all from the perspective of lines on paper are far more efficient to change than work in place in the field, as David said. And that's the primary reason. So the plan review doesn't exist as an end to itself. It's there to support the field inspection. So we do a plan review to identify and to come to agreement with the designer on certain critical elements, and the single line diagram would be one of them. That's a basic, and it's critical that we arrive on the ratings of the equipment, the conductor sizes, the overcurrent protection, and the location of those elements, along with things like available fault current and those things that are unique to each design. And we definitely want to get those ratings out of the way before the equipment's ordered and on site and installed. So some of those things will be more important in say, a commercial plan review as opposed to a residential plan review. For residential, it might be more location of outlets or things like that are critical for review, or perhaps just new code changes that designers and installers may not be aware of. So it really depends on the occupancy, but that's the key. What is the occupancy and what are the specific requirements?
That's a good point. And you talked about the ratings, the conductor size. What about the physical nature? I know I had a note in here that Jody Wages brought up with regard to whether or not like gas piping and other obstructions might be either in a working space. I mean, would you look at just like a one-line diagram, or do you actually look at physical plans, like physical equipment locations?
Well, if I could add, you have to look at the entire plan because that's the foundation of the electrical installation. We have to make sure things are located where they're allowed to be, and that other systems like gas piping, sprinkler piping, and so forth doesn't violate some of their dedicated spaces, or they're not in a place where they're not allowed to be. So getting that initial plan review is really building a foundation to an electrical installation, that everything's allowed to be where it's at. It's in the right space. Even door swings. Oftentimes the code requires doors to swing outward.
It's true.
So we need to check that on plan review. Many times we'll see that the opposite is occurring, and that can be a very expensive proposition on a final inspection to have to change door swing. You do it in plan review and it's resolved at an early stage.
Yeah. The other thing is just the number of doors, right? So if you have a large equipment where you do the calculations for based upon the amp size of the service or the equipment, how many doors you might need for egress. I'm trying to remember the section number. Is that 110 dot? It's 110. 110 to 26. There, see that? That's what I love about working with you guys. I can't remember these numbers, but you fling them off the tip of your tongue.
You can't forget those. But you bring up a good point, and locations are important. Now, it depends what's in play. So the experience of the plan reviewer is critical. And to me, the best experience for plan review is having done field inspections and field installations. For example, you asked about locations. Overcurrent devices, say for a feeder tap, 240.21 feeder tap, or transformer secondary protection, 240.21c. There's some distance limitations, some length limitations there. And so I do look for those at the plan review stage. Now, do I look for locations for everything? Not necessarily, but those items that are going to be critical to the design, to the inspection, that we want to make sure we get right first time, I'm definitely going to be looking at those. And I'd say service location, working clearance for that service, egress, as you mentioned, from that service or that large equipment, wherever that large equipment is located. Those are key elements that may require redesign of the structure, the building, the room itself to satisfy. So we want to make sure that we're covering those. Now, is the receptacle in the right location? Well, it depends what the occupancy is. It may not matter. It may not matter if the receptacle is 6 feet this way or 6 feet that way. So you got to have that key knowledge of what's in play, what's critical, what's the critical path. And keep in mind the whole purpose, from my perspective, is getting the design right so the installation's right the first time, and we all get this done in a quick way at the least amount of cost required.
So I got two questions. JW says he built a substation in California, and one of the difficulties was the idea that a minor drawing revision meant a new drawing review. So that's a good question for both of you. What triggers, like if I submit a set of plans and for a commercial building, say, and I make a change in my plan for whatever reason, either the customer says, "Hey, I want to add something," or if they removed some things and I have to change the overcurrent sizes. What do we have to? Is it a continuous process of submitting drawings, or do I submit it once and then we wait for a field evaluation? I don't know.
Well, I can start with that. Oftentimes we get revisions on plans. The plan should reflect what is actually being installed so the inspector on site can follow along with the plans, seeing what's located where. Now, there are certain minor things. If the configuration of a group of luminaires is slightly different, does that have an effect? It could on the egress paths, so the inspector in the field can determine that, in which case we'll want to document it and review for egress illumination. Some things are very important, some are critically important, but at the end of the day, the plan should actually be a permanent document as to what was installed at that location.
Yeah. All right, Pete, what do you think? Do you have a criteria?
Yeah, generically. I mean, obviously the whole point of the plan is to know what we're going to build before we build it. So ideally, yes, the installation matches the plan. So either you've got to install per the plan, or you got to change the plan to match the installation. Now, some items could be minor that wouldn't require plan review. Having said that, we don't know it's minor until we look at it, right? So the best path is always to build precisely like the plan indicates. But if we get changes, they may be fine. We just don't know that, and our field inspector is not in a position to plan review in the field. So there is some judgment there, I'll grant you, and that comes with experience on what's critical and what's not. But all we can tell installers is follow your plan, or the plan has to change, or the installation has to change, because at some point those two have to match. Right. The other item that's critical there is who's making the change. We're going to have a designer of record. Might be an electrical engineer of record. It could be the contractor if it's design build. But the point is, I don't have the right to approve a change that the designer didn't originate. So it could be that someone's made a change in the installation that wasn't in accordance with the owner's wishes or his engineer architect. So I have a responsibility to make sure that the designer of record, the electrical engineer of record, whoever it is, whoever's legally permitted to design and take responsibility for that plan, that plan's followed. And if there are changes, that he or she is okay with those changes.
Okay, so that brings up an interesting point that I think I was at a IAEI meeting when I learned this not too long ago. I always was under the impression that the electrical inspector only inspected to meet the National Electrical Code. So if I, as the design engineer, exceed the National Electrical Code for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe I want my conductors larger, or I don't know, as long as I'm not violating the code, if it's on my drawing, do you expect to see it in the field?
Yeah, can I jump in on that one, Dave? So that came up recently here. The electrical engineer designed an 800 amp service for a new building. Now, minimum electrical code would have allowed a 400 amp service. However, the 800 amp service was desired for future expansion, for metering purposes, so that the tenants, there could be future tenants, and they may need that full 800 amps of capacity. So if I were to inspect simply by the minimum requirements of the NEC, I could have approved that 400 amp service, but that wouldn't have been in accordance with the electrical plans as prepared by the engineer.
Interesting. How about you, David?
Well, oftentimes if the plans, if somebody attempts to upgrade what they think, that can have other implications. It can result in a larger raceway size being required, full box sizes being larger, sometimes increasing the size, such as on a transformer secondary conductor, can result in a larger supply side bonding jumper being needed.
Yeah.
And in Pete's example, if you went from 400 to 800 amps, the issue we already talked about comes in where the doors must open outward for 25 feet from the working space, which was not a requirement on the 400 amp. So increasing, and we always like to think bigger is better, but it comes with other implications.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think that leads into Felix Sandoval's question, asking, does a plan review include a calculations review? So are you doing load calculations and things like that during the plan review phase?
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess a trigger for that would be if you're doing like 100% rated versus 80% rated equipment, you're going to see that in the load calculations, right?
Indeed.
Yeah, we definitely, we're looking for that. Having said that, many times it's obvious that the equipment is going to meet any load requirements that are there. Sometimes the load requirements are incorrect. They're not done correctly, but I know they're okay based on applying Article 220 to the installation. So we are checking to make sure it's sized correctly. We are looking for load calculations as part of the plan. It should be there. Having said that, do I turn it around if they're wrong? Not if it still meets minimum code requirements.
Do you flag that and let the contractor know that they didn't do a good load study, or even fault current calculations too, right?
Right. Yeah,
Well,
I'd be looking to the designer for that information.
We recently had a job where the designer, the engineer of record, decided to put a 55% adjustment on his heat and air, which should have been 100%.
Ooh.
The result came up with the service. He needed 1,000 amp service. He had an 800 amp at the end of the day. That could be significant in design and in functioning of the system. Overheating and fire is such an ugly word.
Yeah, yeah, that's the truth. Yeah, and that brings up a good point. I mean, in plan review is the time to catch things that once you get it installed, it's hard to fix. It's easy to fix it on paper and address the changes, but it's harder to say if you showed up on a job site and the inspector said it should have been 1,000 amp service, not 800. That's a big major issue.
It is.
That's now Ryan says that in his state, the inspector is required to enforce plans via state statute and licensing requirements. So let's talk a little bit about when is it required and when is it a recommended practice, I guess you'd call it. I mean, do all states require you to do a plan review? Do you have any awareness on that? Any visibility?
There's not even a requirement in this state that all do a plan review, all jurisdictions. So, I couldn't speak for other states, but it's not necessarily required. I know some large cities in this state that do not do plan review, but we don't feel that's good service to the owner of the building to not validate the plan prior to the work. The process here, I mean, there's three things four possible replies I have to an electrical plan review. One is NA, not applicable, meaning there's no electrical work to be done, or it's so minor there's no engineering review required. Field check, which means it's a minor electrical plan that, again, engineering review is not necessary. They'll check installation in the field, apply the code. Or it's a plan review, which either passes or fails. And if it fails, we provide comments for approval. So not every plan requires a review. It depends on the amount of work. Really, it depends on the viewpoint you spoke of. Is it going to be a problem if they get this wrong? Is it something we can get right now so they don't have to order a new Eaton circuit breaker that might take a while to get?
Yeah.
At final. It's that perspective.
Yeah. And you mentioned a good I never thought about it. You said it's a service to the owner, and that is a lot of times we lose sight of the fact that the value that you bring to the table is for the owner of the building, whether it be a homeowner or a business owner, to make sure that the product that they're getting installed, yeah, it's done on paper and it was done accurately. And oh, by the way, when it was in field installed, it was done correctly. So that's an important aspect of it. I never really thought about it that way, but that's
who I work for. Yeah, that's who I work for, is the owner. It's for his benefit. It benefits the contractor as well, because like I tell them, you know, if we approve the plan, the design, and the installation, when someone says you did it wrong, Mr. Contractor, I'll stand shoulder to shoulder with you and say, no, this guy met code. So it protects everybody. But indeed, we sometimes lose sight that we work with the designer, with the contractor, for the benefit of the ultimate owner.
Yeah.
And his insurance.
Pete's phrase about it affecting everybody is very true, because when you think about issues of plan review and getting it right and getting the inspection right, who does that involve? It involves a service electrician who shows up to work on a panel that he has proper and safe working clearance. It applies to the occupants of the building, so they have proper egress lighting and exit directionals, and they function properly. It involves the owner, basically everyone that is going to be in or around that building, and even first responders who may show up there in an emergency. So plan review is the base, the foundation for safety for everyone.
Yeah. Now, do you guys get pushback with regard to the time it takes? I mean, you know, projects, I'm sure there's the I need to get this occupancy and all that good stuff. So I'm sure you catch some ribbing on the time at least. Yeah,
well, you know, it's critical that all jurisdictions use their time efficiently. And in our case, a commercial plan review, we guarantee either acceptance or comments for non-acceptance within 10 working days. And so that's possible, it's doable, and I think jurisdictions should work to a performance standard that's efficient for all. It's only difficult to do, it's only difficult to get right, with all due respect, if you don't know how to do it. So it's critical that whether you're the designer, the installer, or the inspector, or the plan reviewer, that you're qualified. And to be quite honest, we do a tracking method here. So we track when the plans come in, when they're reviewed, who reviewed them, and how long it took. And we do that because when we get criticism for time factors, we can point out that, well, we reviewed and provide comments in 10 days. The designer didn't respond for 3 months to our comments. So is the delay on permitting because we didn't review it, or because someone refused to respond to our comments?
Very good point. Very good point. Now, that's your jurisdiction. Not every jurisdiction does that type of due diligence, right? I'm sure some are probably better than others. I think we're all that way. But I think another aspect, and I know there are some inspectors that I know that do this, that work with, say, architectural engineering firms or electrical contractors to do a plan review internal before it hits the state, right, or the jurisdiction. So the due diligence that we can do up front on the drawings before I send it to Pete Jackson or David Humphrey for your eyes probably makes your job and time easier if it's the more accurate the designs are, right? And I'm sure the complexity of the design may take a little bit longer as well. But I mean, there's probably some thought that could be made up front before the drawings actually are submitted for a formal plan review.
Well, one of the things I would add to that line is probably the number one reason for a failed plan review is simply the completeness of the application. Does the plan require PE seal and it's not sealed? Incomplete information. Oftentimes we'll see when there are grounding issues, we'll see a little note that says ground per Article 250. Well, that doesn't give me a whole lot of information. Things like that, and those stop a plan review in their tracks.
Yeah.
So going through with a complete plan review, working through it on your own and making sure you have everything detailed will definitely facilitate an approval.
Yeah.
The two C's, correct and complete. And whether it's plan review or field inspection, that's what we're looking for, correct and complete.
Absolutely.
And agree, you know, those designers that do an internal review first, that's probably a good process. And in reality, you know, there's some engineering firms that I never have comments on. They're good. They know what they're doing. They do a review.
Mhm.
Their plans are always correct. But I still have to check them, and they want me to. But I agree, the basics. Things like, are the plans stamped and sealed? They're required to be and they're not. That's very common. It's sort of like, you know, did you sign your check type of thing? So
Right.
the basic, complete, and correct.
So JW is pointing out that that the PE's stamping the prints, which you just said, it's a requirement that they need to stamp the prints. He's mentioning the jurisdiction wants a wet PE stamp and not a copy. Is that something that's important to make sure that it wasn't a copy, like a drawing that was copied? Do you need that stamp fresh, so to speak?
It depends on the jurisdiction. Air jurisdiction will take an electronic seal.
Okay.
We take electronic as well.
All right. So this really might point out the fact that depending upon the jurisdiction, depending upon the HJ, the requirements will be different. So what you accept may not be what someone else accepts. And the fact that you do plan reviews doesn't mean that everybody does a plan review. So,
well, indeed, if you think about it, does Square D do everything the same as Eaton, the same as Siemens? Does
exactly.
Contractor A do everything the same as Contractor B? So yes, jurisdictions are all different, just like all installers, just like all manufacturers, just like all designers have their own ways of doing things. So do jurisdictions, and that's okay. That's how it's intended to
Absolutely
work.
Right. And I think the important part of that is to understand what the requirements are wherever it is, because you might have a contractor or a designer who's living in Atlanta, Georgia, doing a job out in Bakersfield, California, and they need to know what are the requirements in Bakersfield, California, because they may be different than what's in Atlanta, Georgia, right? I mean, so is that something that's on a website? Is that something that somebody should call the inspection group to say, hey, what are my requirements here? Or would you say the fact that you have to ask the question means you're not qualified?
Well, it's a good question to ask, and I always appreciate when a designer reaches out to me, and I'll certainly have that discussion. Having said that, the biggest difference I notice across jurisdictions is not so much that there's different code requirements. You do need to know which version of the NEC they've adopted. That's critical. But beyond that, it's more of enforcement. If they don't have someone who knows the NEC rules that are in play, that's where the discrepancies come in. The code itself, and even though we can all interpret some elements of it slightly differently, it's fairly uniform for those that understand it. And the bigger problem is that there are jurisdictions out there that don't have a qualified electrical plan reviewer or a qualified electrical inspector, and that's where these problems arise.
That's a good point. That's a good point. So Felix is saying, and I think Felix brings up a good point, that do I have to have my complete job done before I send it to plan review, or can I, quote unquote, piecemeal it?
We would definitely prefer that you have it complete.
Okay.
And sometimes it's going to have to be depending on the installation. But oftentimes people will start off with a plan review and then add.
Yep. Now,
So forth.
Yeah, and JW points out that Felix's question. So what JW is pointing out, that when you have projects where you have a long lead time on equipment, you may need to get some equipment on order, and you might not have the complete picture. So what you're saying, David, you'd much rather have the complete picture, but in those instances, it would be more of a discussion between the AHJ and the say the project person, whoever it is, to make sure that everything's coordinated correctly. Would you say that?
I would say that that's partially the case. I think if you start ordering equipment before you have your complete plan done, you live at your own peril because
Yeah.
that can change rapidly on you.
Yeah, you know what?
Uh,
That's a good point because really, I don't need a plan review done for me to order my equipment.
Right.
I could order my equipment, and the level of risk is only based upon the level of completeness or my accuracy and how I've designed the system.
That's correct. Yeah. So if you're wanting me to sign off on something I can't authenticate or approve, you don't need my approval for you to order the equipment. Now, you're taking a big risk, but sometimes that question is really saying, well, I want you to take the risk with me so I can blame you if it's wrong. And I can't, because I need that complete and correct plan review to validate what you're ordering. Now, what you're ordering may be fine. I don't know, but I need more information. When those situations arise, I'm always happy to have that discussion with whomever is in play. But again, I got to keep the roles. I got to respect the roles. Is the engineer, the design engineer involved in this discussion, along with the contractor, along with the owner? Does the owner know the risks that are inherent of doing that? And then thirdly, maybe it's not really that hard to give me a complete plan. Sometimes the reason the plan's not complete is simply because maybe the designer's not getting paid to complete it or something like that. And so there's really many times no reason we can't have a complete design. It's something else beyond my control. And that's not a reason to validate something that I don't know is correct.
Right.
That frequently happens with us. We'll get plans without an engineer seal on it, for example, but it looks to be a complete set. And translation, the engineer hadn't been paid yet.
Ah, there you
That's
go.
why it's not sealed.
That's why it's not sealed
But
yet.
that stops everything cold, things of that nature. And you also have to remember that as a plan reviewer, we can review and we can understand what's put in front of us. If you have another wing to the building that's not shown anywhere on the plans, we don't know it's there. Now, we do cross-check with the building set, mechanical set, and plumbing set for different systems that could have an impact and so forth. But there's a wing to the building, like I mentioned, and it's not shown on the plans.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's got a thought for down the road. We don't know it's there.
Yeah. And the dialogue that's going on right now between Felix and JW, I think this is an important aspect to sit down and say, look, you're not saying, hey, the design engineer, the contractor can order everything. They could order all the cables, all the conductors, all the terminations, the transformers, the switch gear, the switchboards, get all of that on order. The only risk they run is if they didn't size something correctly, or they violated the National Electrical Code. As long as you know your plans don't violate the NEC, you can order your equipment, because the only thing that Pete or David or whomever is going to, what they're going to bring to the table is when you say, hey, you didn't put the right overcurrent protection on the transformer. You didn't size these conductors correctly. And that's not your fault. You're maybe the bearer of bad news if they bought the wrong conductor. But if you are sure in your design, order away. There's nothing preventing somebody from ordering equipment, getting it on order, right? I mean,
yeah, and the fastest jobs, and we get some pretty high, high pressure jobs here, Amazon, other facilities like that. Those jobs where it's critical, these timelines, they've got their act together in general, meaning the design is complete and things are ordered, and we get the information we need, we approve it quickly. So that is possible. It can be done.
Right.
So there's not a reason necessarily you can't do it the right way. But again, I've got to respect all the roles. I'm not the designer of record. Is he okay with you ordering what you're ordering? Probably not. Right. I'm not the owner of the structure. So the contractor may have an interest in getting it ordered early. And that's great. I understand and respect it. I'm a former contractor myself, but that's not necessarily the reason I can use for approval in itself.
Well, we just had a Facebook plant open up. The plans were about 450 pages of just electrical plans. And we had fewer problems with those 450 pages than I'll have on a typical tenant upfit.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, what about so Felix, not Felix, but JW, we got some good dialogue going on. So the comment was made, interpretations. We all know that there are areas of opportunity, I'll call them, with regard to the National Electrical Code. I think they're relatively rare, but if there is an area where you sat down and said, look, depending upon your call on this, Pete or David, you're either going to require me to do this or this. Is that a phone call to you to say, what is your formal interpretation? Or how would you handle if there's an area where a contractor feels that your interpretation is going to make a difference on what equipment they buy?
Well, I encourage them to reach out to me. And like I always say, the interpretation I use is that of the code authors, the panels. And so I'll reach out to members of the panels. I'll look at the NEC documents for the panel discussions in and around an issue. And, we've got that history going back to the beginning of the NEC. So many times the intent's not that hard to determine if you're looking. And so I have to, put that in two categories. Is this something that the intent's not known, or just they don't like the way my interpretation? Again, the interpretation I want is that of the authors. When you're sitting in that courtroom, when the worst happens, the only interpretation that's going to matter for any document is that of the authors. So are you seeking that interpretation, or are you seeking something different?
That's a very, very valid point. Usually when someone has an issue with a code requirement, it's not because they don't understand the words, it's because they don't necessarily like those words, right? That's a very good point. Very valid point. All right, so I think we know what a plan review is. Feel comfortable with that. We know that in some cases it's required, in some cases it's not. I think my suggestion would be to anybody who's planning a project to try to get as much done of it beforehand to make those jobs go easier for you and everybody. Because if I can get through plan review without any comments, then that process goes fast. Because to your point, you're going to flag everything, send it back to the designer, and then they're going to have to address it and send it back to you. And the more correct I get it on that first shot, the better, the shorter the process time is.
Indeed.
So what do you look for? I mean, can I submit all these electronically? Do I have to bring physical drawings down to your site? Do you guys take PDFs and then print them yourself? Do you just look at them electronically? I mean, how do you do that process?
Well, I'll start. We typically take paper plans only. We don't take them PDF. Okay. We are in the process now in Henrico County, Virginia. That's right in the middle of Virginia near Richmond. We're in the process of going to electronic submittals. So typically you'll bring them in with the proper paperwork in the plans, and then later on it'll be, hopefully in another month or so, it'll be electronic.
Talk about consistency across the country. I could give the same answer. We're currently still on paper plans. We're in the midst of transitioning. And in fact, I was a little bit worried because I'm set to get some new computer displays and equipment as we transition to electronic plan review. I was concerned that IT may come in today and take my computer, which would make it hard to do this interview. But we're close. We're not there yet. We look forward to an all electronic plan review. That's our desire. That's what we want. We think that's better for everyone.
Me as well.
Excellent. Boy, there's some good examples and good dialogue going on. I've heard of instances where a listed transformer and listed inverter are installed on a concrete pad, but the inspector disapproved it in the field because it's not listed as a component. I'm not sure what that means, but you can't look at listing requirements in a plan review, can you?
Yeah. Yes. So for example, just had an installation of electric vehicle chargers come through, proposed installation, and the design was good in terms of the distribution system, the electrical infrastructure. However, I asked for the certification, the UL certification, and the install instructions for the charging equipment itself. And the reply I just got this morning is, this stuff's not certified. It has not, we're working with UL, but it's not listed yet. And so That's a key question I want to ask, because we don't want all those chargers to show up on site and then us not be able to approve them because listing is required. In this case, the manufacturer has an agreement with UL for a field evaluation, and they're going to do field evaluations, which can be done for this equipment for approval. So they're going to add a note to the plan indicating these aren't currently listed, but they will be field evaluated to the correct standard before final inspection. So yes, for certain elements. Now, do I ask for a certification on every piece of equipment that goes into that job? No, but critical pieces, especially newer technology, that's something it's worth bringing up.
The 2020 code will require the generators be listed, and that's a new occurrence by and large. So therefore, when somebody puts a generator in at this point, we may remind them, like Pete mentioned, with a note, make sure it's listed. Another might be a field evaluation may be required. I recently had a set of plans where a tap ahead of the main was called for. And we had put a notation that there would be a field evaluation by nationally recognized testing lab for that. That is a very precise process.
That's a good point. So so some of that would be visible on a drawing, because you would know, based upon all the projects, that if they're going to be doing something that is a little bit outside of the listing of any product, like supply side tapping and things of that nature, that ahead in advance that you're going to need a plan review, and then they could either change their design so that they don't have to do that, or they make sure that they financially can support that activity.
Exactly. That red notation by me with my signature on it is fair warning. And it's also information to the inspector to make sure he has that report from the nationally recognized testing lab on final inspection or at the appropriate inspection.
Which brings up another good point of the person who's doing the plan review is probably not going to be the person who's doing the field inspection. So, right?
More likely than not.
Yeah, because you guys get paid the big bucks and you sit in the office and.
Well, so you bring up a key point, and that can result in dysfunction. In many jurisdictions, unfortunately, you'll see that. In our jurisdiction, we're structured so that I'm supervisor over the field inspectors as well as the design review. So it's critical to me that my inspectors, I have control over them, their training, and what they're looking for in the plans, just so that we eliminate those possibilities. But that's good if it can be done.
We have monthly meetings in my jurisdiction, and when a lot of the things that I go over, a lot of the issues, including warnings about a particular job, something to watch out for, make sure the inspectors are getting what they need in plan review and things of that nature. And new topics come up frequently. So that's a good thing. It's good communication from the guy in the field with the clipboard to the guy behind the desk. That's me.
Yeah.
Communication.
Yeah. And whenever you make those notes, like may require a field evaluation or whatever, those aren't rejections. Those are notes that go to the field, and you're still approving them, but you're just putting information in there for the field and for the designer and owner.
In this jurisdiction, when I put that note on there that a field evaluation shall be required, it becomes part of the approved plan.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's mandatory.
It does here as well. Now, depending on what we're talking about, I usually would ask the designer first, would you like to put that note on there? I'm not going to approve it without the note, and if you won't, I will. But the main thing is I want to make sure everyone's aware of it. And, beyond field evaluations, there's also testing. If you think of the requirements of 230.95, ground fault protection, or circuit breakers over a certain size, of certain size services, voltage system, there's a requirement there that says that shall be tested in the field. So that's another one we key on. And now I'll usually redline that or put a note there because we can't release or energize that surface until that testing's been accomplished.
That's
Same here.
That's a good point. Now, would you include a note, like say, for example, when you're going through the plans, if you had questions, I don't know, I'm just going to make something up. 80% versus 100% is in my mind. Would you make a note if, like, say for example, the contractor or the designer called you and asked for how are you going to handle the interpretation of something, and for clarity, would they have they ever asked you to put a note on the system that in the drawings that this is how you are enforcing a certain area for clarity, so that you don't have somebody in the field enforce it one way, enforce something different than how you would want to have them enforced? I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
I think what you're after, Tom, is occasionally we have areas in the code, and I agree with your earlier statement that they are few and far between. But sometimes we get into those judgment calls, like nearest the point of entrance in 23070, or subject to physical damage, and things of this nature. And those are the type of things that I typically get the question on. I have 12 foot of cable going into a building. Do you consider that nearest the point of entrance? And then we fall back to policy and what we consider and so forth. And answer that question as best we can on that. Sometimes it can be done. Most of the time, it's go back to a strict reading of that section of the NEC, and that answers the question.
Yeah. Okay.
And I agree that goes back to the whole purpose of plan review, is to eliminate some of those judgment calls,
Right.
And so that it's clear to everyone what they need to do, what's going to be enforced. And we're looking for consistency, not just on that one job, but for everybody. We want to make sure everybody in this jurisdiction is treated the same. We want consistency in application of the code and enforcement. And the plans are a key way to achieve that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Felix is saying, do I have to put every reference, trade, model, specs of items in the plans? Not sure what he means by that. I guess, here's one calling straight out to you, David. It says David, and I don't know if this is meant to be I don't know if this is an actual question, but he says, what about the approval of the dedicated NSA room in the Facebook data center? What's NSA? Is that National Security Agency?
Well, it could be. I'm not sure exactly what that is. That was a complicated job with lots of moving parts. So if you could explain a little more about that. Yeah. We do have cases where we have federal and sensitive projects. Our power company basically built a Faraday box around a control center here. And that was secretive. And long story short, we got the plans, but they were in parts a bit at a time for that national security issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Then Michael Hoffman pointed out, I think to answer Felix's question, that the plans may refer to specifications, which would have the detailed info about the equipment. So Felix was asking about all the different models and specifications and things like that about the references, the equipment. And I think to Michael's point, the plans are going to refer to specs. So do you guys read specifications, or do you just look at a plan?
If the specs are available, I will review them. Normally that's not in play, but if they're part of the submittal, yes. And they may need to enforce them. But more likely, I'm going to do what Michael just suggested and point the contractor to those specifications to answer his question. Gotcha.
Usually another issue is going to arise before I revert to specs. I have some reason to believe that the equipment is outdoors and it's not properly rated, not NEMA 3 or NEMA 4 in some cases. And that's when I'm going to refer to the specs to check that out.
Gotcha. And then, JW points out that the interpretation isn't always from a saving financials perspective, that it could be due to shortage of equipment. And he's referencing Schedule 80 PVC. If it's not available, I guess the other materials that you might be able to use on the project would be a good question. But, the code's pretty clear on all the different methods that you can use. If it's outside of an approved method, and you're going to do something different, you'd probably need a field evaluation to say that it's okay, because to your point, you're not going to accept the liability of that. You're going to say, I want a third party to make sure that this is equivalent, right?
Well, again, I would point, if those questions come up, the first one I'm going to point the contractor to is the design engineer, designer for the project. Was an RFI written? Did you ask them? What did they say?
Mhm.
That's a very good point, because to your point earlier, the engineer of record on that project, if the contractor is going to be swapping out materials, they shouldn't come to you. They should be going to the engineer and say, hey, is this approved? And then the engineer would change the drawings and then talk to you.
We have a lot of cases where we might show, say, EMT, electrical metallic tubing for the job. Well, perhaps MC cable might be legal by the National Electrical Code. However, if that's not what the engineer has included in his design, he either needs to go back to his original design and use EMT, or change his design to allow MC cable. But again, it gets to that point that it has to be a snapshot of what's really there.
Yeah. And I liked, Pete, your comment. And I don't know why this is like earth shattering to me, but it is. You are there looking out for the interests of the owner. I mean, and for everybody, but I never really looked at it. When I look at it from that perspective, I now understand the fact that if the planner who worked with the architect, who also worked with the owner because they designed for a future and they elected to increase the size of the service, or they elected to put larger equipment in because they know the future of the project, you're going to be looking for that in the field, not just what's based on the National Electrical Code. If the designer said, I need this size transformer, you're going to make sure that that size transformer is there. And it's all about understanding that you're just making sure that the owner's getting what the plans are saying they're getting. Yeah,
because if you've been around the block a few times, you're going to get called into claims and lawsuits, and those issues are always in play. Did somebody skim the job? Did somebody cheat on what they were supposed to install? There's a contract there, and that contract is based on those approved plans. And I can play dumb, but I can't play stupid. So it's because someone may ask me later down the road, you didn't understand that they substituted, you're an electrical inspector and you didn't know there's a difference there, and now it's costing the owner some money. Yeah, we have a responsibility.
Yeah,
indeed.
Live up to it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. All right, so we hit the what a plan review is. We hit when it's required. We understand, I think, that we beat that up pretty good. And we understand what you're looking for, that it's all encompassing. It's not necessarily just code compliance. It's also what are the expectations of the designer and the owner, etc. A successful plan review. I think the key aspects of a successful plan review, from our conversation, I mean, we all want to make sure things go smoothly. That's why we're all talking. Communication is the best bet, but having your plans correct and complete. 2 CCs, the 2 C's. I like that. Correct and complete is what you're looking for, and that's what you're going for.
Yeah, and throw the other C in their communication.
Oh yeah, and yeah, communication. So I always say that communicating gets through a lot of problems, and I know sometimes it can be, especially when you are getting hit by, I don't know, however many projects in your jurisdiction, but if I have my plans on your desk, those are the most important plans in my mind that you could possibly have. So, and I know we all have an expectation of response times and all this other good stuff, but communicating with the AHJ is, I think, critical throughout the entire design process. It makes problems go away sooner rather than later. So, any final words of wisdom with regard to the plan review? And we'll start with you, David Humphrey.
Again, correct, complete, check your work before you submit, and understand that the plan reviewer can see what's on the paper, and we'll want to be able to follow a job from service to wiring methods to equipment. Don't hold anything back. I have rarely turned down a plan because it had too much information.
Excellent. And Mr. Jackson.
Yes, make sure your plans are as complete as possible when you turn them in. If you are missing something, we'll bring it to your attention, trust me. So but do the best you can, submit, reach out and ask questions. If you have questions, if you have concerns, I'm more than happy to talk to you. That's, again, communication is key. So complete, correct, concise, and good communication. And remember, it's a service for your protections, for the protection of the owner, of the contractor, and the designer.
That's a
But
great
remember the roles and responsibilities of all of those.
That's a great point. And I put some reference materials in down below. I have I've got the National Certification Program for the Construction Code Inspectors. This is right on the IAEI's website. You can we can help you with that exam. We also have some study guides in there with regard to, there it is, the plan review study guide. I don't care what version the NEC that you're dealing with, but it's important that and relatively inexpensive for $25. It's a great study guide for focusing on plan review. So the IAEI has a lot of materials. In fact, there was some materials on plan review, some articles in the IAEI News magazine or the IAEI magazine. So my advice to everybody is to make sure that you are a member of IAEI, you're getting access to those materials, whether it be the magazine, and subscribe to the YouTube channel, because I know for a fact, and I have it from very good authority, that this channel is going to be doing more on plan review to help people understand the value of that, because I sort of know the guy who's going to try to orchestrate that. So, and hopefully that will be a great an asset to the electrical industry. So thanks to Felix out there, Michael Hofkin, JW as usual, and Jody Wages, Felix. I see him just looking at all the different. We had some good dialogue going on this session. So thanks for joining us. Thank you, Pete and David. I really appreciate your time. I know you're both busy, and we probably took you away from a very critical plan review that someone's going to be beating you up over. There it is. He's doing it right now. So I appreciate your time, guys. And I know everybody else does too. So great session. And we will look forward to seeing you on a future edition. And David Williams. And then you don't need to be an inspector to join the IAEI. That's exactly right, David. That's why this discussion is not just important for an inspector. It's important for designers, installers, and everybody who's going to be involved with the whole process. So the IAEI is a great resource, and I know our membership is going to go through the roof. So you better get yours in now and get it in early and get it in often. That's what we always say. All right, guys. So thank you. I appreciate your time and all that jazz. So guys and everybody, we will be talking to everybody out there next week. So thanks for joining in. Take care. And remember, stay safe and please stay healthy. Thanks, guys. I'm going to hit the stop streaming.